My initial thought is that we are guaranteed the right to free speech. We know that. I mean, that is First Amendment. It's a core principle. It's part of our American heritage. We are guaranteed the right to free speech, but we are not guaranteed the right to every medium of speech. So TikTok itself is not an enumerated right. TikTok is an app that I have personally avoided like the plague. All of the apps are so incredibly addictive, and I'm worried about my own personal productivity. I'm worried about worshiping at the altar of social media and becoming engrossed in how many people have liked or clicked or shared my content. What I spend most of my time on is the leadership of my staff and the congregation at Metachurch, and on helping to try and kind of organically build this podcast, hoping that it will be helpful to some people someday. So TikTok is known to be the most addictive of all the social media apps, that its algorithm learns you inside and out and feeds you a steady stream of content that can keep you trapped for hours and hours on end. And it's worth noting that there are content creators who are making their entire livings as TikTok influencers, which makes all of this a very big deal. The House of Representatives just passed a bill that, if it passes the Senate and is signed by President Joe Biden, would effectively ban TikTok from the United States, from all of the app stores, from use inside the United States, unless the parent company ByteDance divests from the app itself. We'll read a little bit about that story here. It says, on Wednesday, the GOP-led House passed a bill that could lead to a ban on TikTok unless its Chinese-based parent company, ByteDance, divests in the popular social media app. The legislation, known as the Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary Controlled Applications Act, was approved by a 352 to 65 vote. 50 Democrats and 15 Republicans voted against the measure. The bill now heads to the Democrat-controlled Senate. According to a press release from the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, the bill prevents App Store availability or web hosting services in the U.S. for ByteDance-controlled applications, including TikTok, unless the application severs ties to entities like ByteDance that are subject to the control of a foreign adversary, as defined by Congress in Title 10. So we have perhaps the most popular social media app that might get banned. It's 2 steps away, passing the Senate and then being signed in by the executive. And so how do we think about this? Number one, I think anytime there's bipartisan support for something, we should at least pay attention to that. We're in such a politically fractured society that when you can get 352 of the representatives in the House, it's a GOP-led House, but by like 2 seats. It's a razor-thin margin. It's basically 50-50 in the House. 352 people voted to pass this bill. Only 65 stood against it. It is bipartisan, ironically, on both sides. This is like the one issue that has brought Congresswomen AOC and Marjorie Taylor Greene, who are like 2 sides of the crazy spectrum, as these strange bedfellows who are standing against this together. I'm sure it has nothing to do with the fact that both of them have a sizable following on the application TikTok. What's also interesting is this started by going through a committee, specifically the committee who studies the Chinese Communist Party. And so it's their job to be as informed as possible. 50 of the representatives go in and they study what's going on, which means they looked at this at some level of depth to see if there really was the potential for data harvesting from the app being fed to the Chinese Communist Party. And the bipartisan committee passed this 50-0. Every single person was in favor of this, which gave it the momentum to then pass in the House 352 to 65. So what are the claims? The claims, number one, and this has been kind of the worst kept secret, is that the Chinese Communist Party is using TikTok to mine extreme amounts of data from American citizens. Not only that, but TikTok in China is allegedly a very different app that is focused on things like education and sociology and discipline and inspiration, where in America, the algorithm tends to lean towards fringe ideas, radical policies, lots of sexual confusion, all being targeted primarily at an audience of Gen Zers and younger millennials. So people are up in arms about this. And when this legislation started gaining steam, not only did TikTok speak out against this, of course, it has a vested interest in doing so, but young people around the country began to absolutely lose their minds, some even threatening to unalive themselves if they weren't able to scroll on TikTok anymore. And then, of course, there are the TikTok influencers who would lose large streams of income, some of them their only streams of income. So how should we think about this? There are arguments on both sides of this, on both sides of the aisle. It's one of the more interesting political conversations that's happening right now. There are Republicans who are all for this. TikTok is toxic. It is infiltrating the minds of our kids. Our kids, in a real sense, are addicted to this platform, like an actual clinical addiction. They don't think they can live without it. That's obviously a problem. An adversarial country and a communist party mining our data and getting information on American citizens, obviously concerning. And if we can do something about it, then we should do something about it. On the other side, they're saying that this vests, especially the executive, the president, with way too much power to potentially censor other social media companies in the future. That could be a real problem. And it's worth asking who benefits the most from this bill being passed. And the person who benefits the most is, of course, Mark Zuckerberg.
Wow.
Now, I've seen no proof of this, but there is a burgeoning rumor that Zuckerberg and Meta, his company, is pushing and lobbying and funding and trying everything to take TikTok out.
Wow.
And that makes complete sense. This would benefit him. It would benefit Instagram. And maybe in a really crazy move, Meta could actually come and purchase this app like it has done Instagram and other apps that used to be independent of it, and really, really establish more of a monopoly on the social media side of things. So is this an assault against our free speech, or is this protecting Americans from an adversarial force and something that's poisoning the mind of our children? It's a nuanced question, and it requires a nuanced answer. I'll always be honest with you guys. I don't know that I have a super strong feeling about this. My gut reaction is that TikTok is not a social good. And my heart goes out, especially to people who have created a living on the platform, if in fact they did end up losing that living. Now, it is so popular that odds are, if ByteDance does divest from the company or from the application, it will get bought by someone in America, and not much will actually change. It will still be a powerful algorithm. It will still be highly addictive. Our kids will still be on it way too much. Not my kids. My kids don't have social media. You don't get social till at least 16, and only 16 if you're mature. Parents, just so you know, you can do that. Now your kids will be like, bruh, they will want it so bad, right? But you're the parent and God made you in charge. And so just be in charge and don't let your little bitty kids get on TikTok. It's poisoning their minds, right? So to me, it's like, okay, sure, let's get rid of it. I do understand the arguments on the other side. I'm really interested in your thoughts, my loyal listeners. Tell me in the comments what you think. Here is my initial thought. My initial thought is that we are guaranteed the right to free speech. We know that. I mean, that is First Amendment. It's a core principle. It's part of our American heritage. We are guaranteed the right to free speech, but we are not guaranteed the right to every medium of speech. So TikTok itself is not an enumerated right. We don't have a right to TikTok. And not only that, there is jurisprudence that has come all the way from the Supreme Court level back in 1969 that shows that the government can put barriers around communication mediums if they are seen as dangerous or against the well-being of the American population. This was in a ruling called Red Lion Broadcasting Company versus the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. The Federal Communication Commission exists specifically to put rules and parameters over the broadcasting channels of radio and television to help protect the American populace. Red Lion Broadcasting didn't like a specific aspect of that. And they came to the conclusion, listen, everyone has the right to free speech, but everyone doesn't have a right to every single medium of speech. And we know this, every Sunday I get up and I preach to our congregation and I have a microphone in my hand, and someone can't just run into the middle of our auditorium at Meta Church and start screaming whatever they want. They have a right to free speech, of course, but there are parameters to the mediums of speeches. The same is true in all kinds of public places, and the same is true on public platforms. I'm not saying that there isn't still nuance to whether or not this is a good bill or whether it should be shaped or worded differently. But at the top level, my thought is we are guaranteed the right to free speech, but not the right to every medium of free speech. And that just seems like an obviously true thing. Now, how should we think about this as Christians if we're going to have a biblically inspired worldview where we look at this current event through the ancient wisdom of Scripture? I love what Paul wrote to the church in Thessalonica. He said, test everything and hold fast to what is good. Test everything. So if you want to download TikTok and get on there, test it out, sure. But as soon as it isn't good for you, stop holding so fast to it. Maybe let it go. Maybe delete your application. Peter wrote something similar to his church. He said, be sober-minded and be watchful. And remember, your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. So look, the world is not for you. These application companies are not for you. It's free to get on TikTok. It's free to get on Instagram. And it's free because you are the product. You are what they are monetizing. Their goal is to keep you on their platform for as long as they possibly can. And in the case of TikTok, to potentially steal some of your data to use against you. You are the product. And the question of whether we should allow that to be done at the scope and scale of TikTok is a question that I am glad we are wrestling with, even at the federal level of politics. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you are subscribed so you can stay up to date with all new content. And if you want early access, exclusive content, and monthly live Q&As, make sure to check out patreon.com/Clayton Tyner.